Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation, short webinar on using Navisworks templates to set up a quantification workbook structure for BIM projects. This is mostly geared towards project managers and the like who receive our BIM models created in Revit or any of the other BIM platforms. My models are coming from Revit, so I'll be using those. But anybody that is scheduling buildings will understand the need to have a workbook structure for the BIM project, because ultimately that will determine the sequence in which the building will be constructed. In this morning's webinar, our agenda is as follows: to download the Navisworks Quantification Catalogue, the template for the creation thereof, to set up the relevant standard using that template, and then to export that to an XML file. We then import the XML file into Navisworks, and if you have any questions, we'll be dealing with that towards the end. So first off, where do you get a hold of the Navisworks Quantification Catalog creation template? Well, it's quite old. It was already created in 2014. And you can find it online at this web link. You can search for it on Google. You should find it quite easily. If you just type in Autodesk Navisworks Quantification Catalog Creation Template. It's a simple process to download. From the website, there's a compressed file holding an Excel spreadsheet. And there is a PDF that is a README, which explains very carefully how you can use the template. Once you've downloaded it, and extracted it, you'll find these two files. The first is the Excel file that we'll look at. There are 3 workbooks: the item catalog sheet, the resource catalog sheet, and the lookup sheet. The item catalog sheet has columns with an explanation for the workbook structure. In this case, a very short example is given from the unit class, from the uni format code. And it explains how you can use both the point and the / character as separators for the hierarchy levels. So a hierarchy level is like an indentation in a menu, in a tree. And then we've got the type. If the item is supposed to be a node, then we denote that with a group. So in other words, if you look at the interiors over there, that's a group. C20 is a group. C20.10 is a group. You can see the workbook structure as opposed to the item. And then we have the items themselves. C20.10.1, C20.10.2. And that's how it will display. Then we've got the name. That's optional. Everything else is optional, but the workbook structure and the type is required. It helps if you have the standard available to you already. And then lastly, we've got the description, the transparency. So when you apply a quantity takeoff within Navisworks, to what color transparency does it map? So the color is given in RG3, red, green, blue, from values of 0 to 255. And then what is the primary quantity units? Optional. So when you start out, this would be a good place to start. And then you can work further with the workbook structure within Navisworks itself. After which, of course, you can always export that XML file again. One must not delete the top, the explanations here in the column. So the only data that one must enter is below this heading. And the same is applicable to the resource catalog. Same structure, except for the colors and the transparency. And then we have the lookup table, where we can see the units. This is what the Autodesk Navisworks Quantification Catalog Creation template looks like, and it hasn't changed over time. Next, we would like to know what the relevant standard is. To give you a bit of background on that, let's start out with a new file. And to kick things off, I'm going to append a Revit file. The Revit file comes in levels, if you're used to this. But on the Quantification Workbook, it still requires a project setup. Initially, the unit format code is available, although it's not an expanded version. Note that one can also go with none, CSI 16 and 48. If one goes with none, the conversion units are still applicable. Then you'll see that there's no workbook structure. The item catalog is then used to create the new workbook structure. Now, clearly you can say there whatever you want. Create a new group in there. And one can create items. Once one creates this within the item catalog, it will be within the Quantification Workbook. To delete whatever we've got here, we can use the delete function. And now let's have a look at what we want to achieve. We saw that the unit class setup is not available. Now, typically on a project, one might have one's deliverables of the application, for instance, class factory, to conform to unit class standard. Or one can have one of the other applications conforming to some or other standard. Now, in this case, the unit class is not available, so we need to set that up. A good place to get a hold of the unit class is from the NBS. It's a very good website. And here you can see that the unit class tables are available for download. You can download all of them in one go. And after they've been downloaded, one may disseminate the tables in Excel. That is which I have done here. It's quite a long standard for the systems. It's very detailed. It's ISO compliant for engineers. That's important. You can see how the separator is an underscore. So clearly with our hierarchy structure, we would need to substitute the underscore with a full stop or a slash. I have evaluated this further to also state whether something is a group or an item. And there is the title. And I've taken it one step further to have the standard appear per level. So to give you an indication what this is, you'll see how it comes out later. I've used 3 symbols to designate the order of the naming. In Navisworks, one can order the items by name or by code. And on the main header, I've also put that code. The first line is not applicable. I've decided to use it as such, that the first 2 items will be the main node. So this reads as placeholder 010, the first floor that is of interest. E3 is corresponding to the level. This is how Revit operates within Navisworks. Items are shown per level: ground level, basement 3. There should be a basement 2 and 1 on which there are no elements at the moment, and so on. It also helps to have, this from a BIM perspective, some layer structure with a designator. You'll recognize B3 from basement 3. There is the placeholder. And for instance, these green elements over there are the one BIM model. That would be the next BIM model in the tier 2 structure. So by way of explanation, that is all that I'm doing here, saying that the workbook structure would be applicable to successive levels from the basement up in the sequence at which elements are constructed. This will help divide the project up. So what quantity do we need per level for certain elements? This ultimately is the workbook structure that I would like to create. So it's not a straightforward unit class system, but it is a unit class system that is applied per level. And that is what we need to achieve with our Autodesk Navisworks Quantification Catalog. I've already done basement 3 and basement 2. I could have created them in the same file. I am now going to show you how we can do level B1 and ground floor in the same file. I'm deleting what is here already. As well as in the resource catalog. The resource catalog that I'm using, I have already created in B3. I'm first saving this file as I'm going to use 01B2 and 03B2 and 040 ground floor. Two in one. So now I'm busy with basement 1. Those columns there. And basement and ground floor. To do the basement, I select the code. And then I paste the code as text into the workbook structure. The type is going to conform. To the standard. And then I need the name. When I scroll towards the end of the file, I'll see that the lengths are similar or exactly the same. And I now also add in the ground floor values. The type is once again standard. And the name And that is as far as I would like to go with this file. 2 levels. Just a quick check to see if the lengths of the columns are the same. They are. If they are duplicate values, the macro that we are going to run is going to pick this up. There are instructions in the README how to enable Excel to run macros if it's not already set up like that. Should be pretty straightforward. And we are ready to export this. Save the file. And then we go export catalog. This is already built into the template. It will look for any errors in our code. And it will assign a 30% transparency random color to the elements. I need to give the generated XML file the relevant name. We can change the color if we'd like. If we set the color before the time, then the algorithm will not override the transparency that we indicate and the color or the color. Now that the XML file has been generated, we will see it within our directory. Just a quick look before we go on at the release notes. Don't discount the document just because it's dating from 2014. It's very good. And the information with regards to Excel is still relevant. It's not a very long README, but it will explain exactly what to do. So we can browse to that XML file when we set up a new project. Or in a situation like this, where we've already done the setup, activated the application. Although we have no quantification workbook structure or item catalog, we can then load from the quantification workbook this XML file. And now we can see how all those codes start making sense in our workbook system. We've got a numbered list, which appears based on the coding. 030 or 030 rather, corresponding to basement 1, 040 corresponding to ground floor. Name over here should be 040. But there you can see the quantification workbook structure having the same sequence across the levels. clearly on higher levels, the foundations wouldn't be relevant. And that is why I would recommend setting up separate files for the different levels so that one can also limit the amount of information that needs to be recorded. So if there are no earthwork systems on ground floor, one can also work in reverse and delete that from the higher level. It's not, or it doesn't necessarily have to be a one-time process. One can also import other catalogs that one might have created earlier. There is basement 3. Takes a small amount of time to generate. There's a lot of elements to go through, thousands. The classification system is very detailed. In this case, the XML file should also generate the products table under the resource catalog. Here you can see how the sequencing, the number that predicates the standard will help you order the levels, which is why I would recommend that you also put a identifier behind the name itself. Doing that will allow you to order the items even by name. Now, because the resource catalog, which is derived from the products table, looks like this. For Navisworks, once again changed. You can see how there are products that are relevant for argument's sake, foundations, and one gets used to the standard so that one can apply the correct items. See, it's quite an expansive list. That's with regards to the products table. One also has a tools table, which lists an abundance of items already classified that one can choose from. And again, putting this into the template will allow you to generate that quickly within Navisworks. Just a quick note on how one can prepare for quantification takeoff. We're not going to demonstrate that now. If you have not yet installed the BIM interoperability tools for your model, I would recommend you do so. So when you look at a typical wall, this is within the ground floor. I'll isolate the category. There are some block walls, some brick walls, and some plaster walls. You can do one of various things, including setting up the project for COBie export. COBie parameters are typically used for facilities management, FM management. And you can see how there are various settings for this, including how the parameters are mapped. It's pretty straightforward. Once one initiates this, shared parameters are loaded into the project. COBie parameters are applicable to both elements as instance properties and some are type properties. They are listed under data. This is the information that we'd like to fill in, ultimately, financial for facilities management. And then there's the classificatory data, in this case based on the PR, the SS, and the EF numbers. That would be based on the unit class code. There you can see what they are. They should look familiar. And in addition to that, you can see how, based on the British protocol, the family type is named. And one must then do a setup of the classification manager, where one can choose the unit class 2015 database. And by clicking on an element, one is able to assign the information to this type by unit class, PR, and SS. Once that is done, the value will reflect in the type property. Everyone can see the name property. And in the Revit type properties, there one can see the classification number. Now, with search sets, one can leverage this information so that one can map this code onto the quantification item directly. However, this is not as straightforward as what just the generation of the quantification workbook structure is, and will require you to do some XML programming on a large project like this. As soon as we add walls of this type, this is the aggregate blocks. So we're looking at S25, 13, 50, 56. If I select all of these walls on that level, I go and have a look on my ground floor. The workbook structure will give me the guidance. So I'm looking at S25, 13, 50, 56. And I do the takeoff. Immediately, the color of the walls are changed to the transparency and the RGB value that was specified in the template. And then formulaically, we can also map the quantities onto our resource catalog. We won't demonstrate that today, but I hope you've seen, at least in principle, that creating a workbook structure for a non-standard standard like the unit class system is easily managed by using the Navisworks workbook classification catalog template. We've had a look at the export. We've seen how the colors and the transparency have an effect once a takeoff is done. That we can load the hierarchies and achieve our ultimate aim. Anybody does have any questions? Which there are none at the moment. You are most welcome to contact us at Micrographics so that we can assist you where necessary. And with tools like these, just as a final thought, the compliance with standards rolled out across the world should be accessible to you, be it in the UK, the Middle East, wherever in the world you operate. Whatever standard is required of you, you will be able to use the template to perform quantification takeoff in Navisworks. Until next time, keep safe during COVID and good luck with your projects.